Hello and welcome to Esther's Gardening Adventures. I'm Esther, and I'm going to take you along with me today in getting my garden ready for the winter and for next year a little bit. This includes some of the tasks you need to do as we come into the first couple of freezes for the season, as well as some of the lessons I've learned from gardening this year and how I'm going to apply them to my plan for next year. So here I am. I am clearing out. This is a plastic fence that goes around this community garden plot that I set up at the beginning of the year because neighbors in the plot next to me just come into my garden and mess with things, take my tools, use my stuff, and I just kind of set up the fence as a nice friendly reminder to kind of stay in their own space. So the problem is that this plastic fence is basically broken down in the heat in the summer and it's gotten caught in the weeds. And so I'm going to buy a temporary metal fence that you can put up next year that'll be easier to remove and to move around. My goal was to clear this bed so that I would start with a somewhat fresh blank slate in the new year. And this is how it looked about halfway through at the end of that day. You can see back where the wheelbarrows, where that yellow bit is, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the back. If you look where those boards are at the very back along the fence, there's a tree growing. There was all kinds of stuff growing out of the beds back there, and that took me another afternoon to get at. But this is how it looked at the end of the day. This is about 2 weeks after I cleared it, and yeah, the garden looks so much bigger once it's cleared, doesn't it? Over here, I have, these are snapdragons and baby's breath growing here. And then this is part of my cut flower beds for next year. I'm probably going to plant the tulips here, fill out the rest of this row, do tulips here. And then I need to plant daffodils. I have a bunch of daffodil bulbs. So there's a square foot bed back here, which there was basically a tree growing out of that because I hadn't gotten back there all year. And so I'm going to now plant the daffodil bulbs there. Okay, so talking about goals. This year was a really hot and dry year. I would say it's one of the hottest and driest summers I've experienced, and I've lived in Maryland Zone 7A for most of my life. And water was an issue because I have to basically haul, this is, by the way, this is compost from the compost pile. I basically have to haul 350 feet of hose to the creek, take the submersible pump with me, the 12-volt battery, which probably weighs about 20 pounds on its own, and watering the garden. This plot doesn't take that long, but watering both of the plots, the community garden, take me about an hour and a half to 2 hours on average. It's just a lot. So if I only have time to get to the garden once, or for a couple hours, it's all going to go to watering and not to other things. Now, the really awesome news is that, and this is chicken manure. I'm just going to do a tiny, tiny sprinkle of this because you can burn things if it's really concentrated, so you don't really want to burn your bulbs. It's just a tiny sprinkle. But as I was saying, something is going to change this year, which is that the garden managers, the county, have drilled a well and are going to be offering water from spigots, this coming year. Now, I don't know what this means in terms of what will happen to the price of these plots and whether that will create some equity and access issues for those who might have a tighter budget. But it hopefully will mean, assuming everyone acts fairly and isn't greedy, and we can work out the kinks on who has access to, not having your hose hooked up or whatever all the time to the faucets. That'll make watering a lot easier. So that'll take care of that problem for me next year. And that'll be a real blessing if it goes well. All right, let's do row 2. Second big takeaway from this year from the garden is that it was a really hot year. Now, we always have hot summers, but this summer was particularly intense. And I don't know how much you know about this, but tomatoes, when the temperatures get above 95 and particularly above 100, and if they're above 100 multiple days in a row and it hasn't rained for a long time, then the tomatoes basically freeze up. They don't do anything. They go into stasis. They don't absorb water, so watering them doesn't even help. You'll get a lot more blossom end rot from them in the middle of the summer, which is usually just a problem in the spring. And this year I tried putting down shade cloth, putting up shade cloth, but it was kind of too little too late. Ooh, there's something metal or rock like in here. Here's a rock. It was kind of too little too late. So there's two things I can do about that. One, this plot number 38, there's a tree line right there. I'm in the shade right now because, well, the tree line. And the tree line gives shade starting around 3:30 right here. And by 5 o'clock, the other end of the garden in the summer is fully shaded. So the good news is if I can't get the other plot this next year, that the trees will provide some natural shading, and I will probably plant the tomatoes here and closer towards the back so that them and the eggplants can get shade earlier in the day, and then the shade cloth won't be as needed. But if I do have that other plot again, if I'm able to get plot number 38 or plot number 5 again, then I will need to set up some kind of more permanent planned shade cloth structure, and that means that I'm going to need to put in some kind of poles or rods or something that are tall enough that I can walk under them comfortably, or at least just not have to crawl, and that will give the tomatoes room to grow and room for the air to circulate. I think I'm putting these things too close together, but that's all right. So I'm not going to invest in those materials until February, late January, early February, which is when I will know whether I have that plot. But if I do, I have the shade cloth. I just need to invest in the infrastructure to take care of it. Now this year I did grow a lot of bell peppers, sweet peppers, and I grew most of them from seed indoors instead of using winter sowing. And that proved to be a good idea because this year winter sowing was a tough year. The winter was really inconsistent, and we had just really cold and then warm. It just wasn't consistently cold or consistently warm. And so some plants sprouted before they should have, and it wasn't warm enough to really support them in the spring. So there's two things I'm doing about winter sowing. One is I'm going to be moving my winter sowing jugs into the front yard. The backyard gets more shade and gets more sheltered, and the front yard gets more sun and heat. So I think that will help the things that need the heat and this direct sun and more hours of sunlight do better. I'm also going to continue with growing most of my pepper plants, starting them indoors as in undergrow lights, because here in Maryland, peppers need a long time to really start producing their fruit. And it's not just that they need a long time, it's that if they're not in the ground, if they're not in the ground early enough in May, and pretty well established and with pretty good root systems and pretty big, then they just won't produce until like the fall. And I was able to get bell peppers starting in July of this year, which I never had been able to do before from when I started the plants from seed. So I think I might still do, no, I'm gonna do all my peppers indoors. I can still grow tomatoes outdoors in winter sowing. I can still grow all my flowers that way, almost all my flowers that way. But yeah, I think peppers are an indoor start now, from now on for me. Another thing I'm doing this year is, with exception to flower bulbs and a couple of seed varieties, I am not buying new seeds this year. I went through my seed collection, and with the realization that pepper seeds only really last 2 years, and most seeds I have are 2 to 3 years old. And my tomatoes, I have enough tomatoes to last me a lifetime for seeds. So I'm not buying new plants this year, new seeds this year, unless there's something I really value or need more of or used up last year. Or they may be something I haven't bought seeds for last year. So one thing, let me put this in the bottom of this. One thing that I have not bought seeds for in the past that I will either get from a giveaway or a swap, or I'll buy the seeds, is okra. I don't like okra raw, but it is really good pickled, which I learned when I went on a trip to North Carolina to the beach this summer. So I plan on pickling and canning okra This needs to be deeper. I plan on pickling and canning okra this coming year, and so that's going to be some seeds I buy. And if you have a favorite okra variety, let me know. I hope I'm planting these deep enough. We'll find out. So that's that. No more seeds this year unless I really, really need them or I'm in love with them. I have enough seeds to go around. Another thing I've realized is that my vining squash and melons tend to do better than my bush squash and melons because they can kind of survive the pests. They can create their own roots along where they grow. They do have some rot issues when they're against the ground, so I'll have to deal with that. But in general, I have found that vining winter squash and melons do really well, or at least I've had some success with this year. And I'll show you a picture of the porcelain Cinderella pumpkins that I grew this year that I had on my table. So I think I'm going to lean in to vining melons and squash this year. And if I don't get the other plot, I'll probably grow them have them grow in trellis along the edge of the garden. And I'm also going to lean into beans this coming year. Last year, I never really got around to beans. I almost always grow some edamame. I almost always grow some green beans. I did a little bit, but there's so many. I have an entire shoebox full of nothing but summer beans, not even peas. Peas are in the cool weather box. I have an entire tote bin of bean seeds. Now they're in bags and stuff, but point being that I need to use those. In addition to growing peppers using indoors under grow lights versus winter sowing, I'm also going to be growing mostly bell peppers and sweet peppers again. You know, you really only need 1 or 2 hot pepper plants to get enough spicy stuff to really give you spice in your meals and stuff. And I don't think I need to add any more. I'm just going to grow 1 or 2 hot pepper plants and focus mostly on bell peppers because they're what I use the most for cooking. And this last year, I didn't grow any of my Jimmy Nardello peppers, which I really wish I had. So those are those beautiful curly red sweet peppers that I just love. And then I think next year I'm also going to give up on green zebra tomatoes. I've grown those every year since I started gardening, and every year they've really struggled. And I think this coming year I need tomatoes that can handle extreme heat, that aren't disease prone. And I find the green zebra tomatoes just really, I love the taste of them. They're one of my favorite tomatoes, but I just really don't do well growing them. They don't do well in my area. And I'm going to dedicate space to. Now, if I only end up with this community garden plot, if I can't get both, there's a big rock in here. If I can't get both community garden plots, I will have to be a lot pickier about what I grow. I also had a really bad year for eggplants. I really didn't get any eggplants this year. And I've almost always gotten some eggplants. And I think part of it is because I grew them in the other garden. And the other plot is drier and windier, and those raised beds, eggplants can handle a little bit of dryness, but they really need a lot of moisture. They need more watering that I was able to keep on them. So I think I'm going to grow them here in this garden. And regardless, I am probably going to, grow them in a more of a afternoon shaded area. Another thing I want to do with this channel is, my whole goal with gardening and this channel is really empowerment, giving people, and myself included, the knowledge and information for growing their own food, for having healthy lives, happy lives, for being empowered to not be dependent on food supply chains, which we know have been really horrendous in the last couple of years. The quality of food alone at markets, at grocery stores, has really suffered. And I think that's going to continue with climate change and other things. So my whole goal is to help teach people how to do things. And I think I'm going to really lean into that. And that'll include more than gardening. So I'm planning a series on canning year round. Most people think of canning as just a spring and summer, maybe early fall activity, but really canning is something you can do year round, depending on what you're canning. You can can beans and other things, in the off season. So I really look forward to offering that. And of course next year I'm going to lean in, as you can see I'm doing right now, I'm going to lean into the cut flower garden. I have realized that when you do a cut flower garden, it does take a lot of processing of the cut flowers and stuff, even if it's for personal use. So it may end up being just a pretty flower garden and not so much a cut flower garden, but I don't know. I like having flowers to cut and put on my windowsill and on my side tables and dinner table and stuff like that. Something else I do every fall is I plant my hard-neck garlic. So hard-neck garlic actually needs a winter freezing temperatures in order to develop multiple bulbs. So soft-neck garlic, it doesn't really need that cold stratification, but hard-neck garlic does. So I put a whole bunch of compost from a compost pile of leaves that had composted in the last 2 years that I finally found after I dug through all those weeds. I put a nice layer on top of these garden beds, and then I planted the garlic. And so when you plant garlic, you want it to be tip side up. You want to dig the hole deep enough that it's fully covered in there, and then you can cover the beds themselves with a nice layer of leaves or some mulch or something else to protect them over the winter. But I found if the winter is pretty mild that you don't even need to do that necessarily. Now, of course, in the fall, you also want to go and clear out any last vegetables before your last big frost, because that frost will destroy any produce that's left, and those plants will also look pretty bad. So I went and collected some last peppers from this garden and the other one, and I got a nice little stack here. This is how my second community garden plot looks, and you can see the zinnias are still going strong, although after tonight's frost, they will probably be goners. There are two things that I need to do in this plot that I don't do in the other one that's over in that corner that we just were at. And that is to take up the hoses and take them home and put them in my basement for the winter so they don't crack when the water that's in them freezes. And then if you have any of the terracotta Oya pots in the ground that you've been using to water your garden, these are I think they're called Thirsty Earth watering system that's through a bucket that sends the water down through these little tubes. Anyway, I had 6 of these in the garden, and I had to go through and take them out because they say online that these don't do well in a freeze, and I really didn't want to end up with some cracked Oyas that I'd have to buy a new set for next year. So yeah, make sure to pull those up too if you have. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please stick around as I have so much great content lined up, and I'm coming back. I'm going to be posting episodes weekly now, if not more often. So please stay tuned. Every Friday through Sunday, I will post a new video at least once during that period. See you next time.